A long peace followed. The Russian Republic turned its efforts toward colonizing the Far East and exploring the coasts of Western America. In 1608, the first overland expedition to Alaska took place, seeing the potential of these distant lands and strengthening along the Pacific coast. The Possadnik ordered the launch of colonization expeditions. By 1612, the first settlers had arrived in America. Yet all was not easy. Supplying the colonies from Okhotsk by passing Kamchatka was costly and dangerous. A safer route was needed. Thus, in that same 1612, Yermak Timofeyevich once again led his troops, this time against the local tribes, seeking to bring them under the Russians' banner. By 1615, the campaign was complete. Kamchatka and the surrounding regions had come under Russian control. Having secured the supply routes to its new settlements in America, Russia once again turned its gaze westward. The goal of uniting all Eastern Slavs under one banner had not yet been achieved. In 1618, Russia invaded the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth once more, this time alongside Bohemia and Denmark. The purpose was clear: to liberate the brotherly peoples of Lithuanians and Ruthenians from Polish oppression. The campaign within the Commonwealth itself went remarkably well. Russian armies met almost no resistance, and by 1619, they controlled nearly 70% of the enemy's territory. However, aid soon arrived from several German principalities and from Milan. In October 1619, they forced Bohemia to withdraw from the war. 2 months later, their combined forces delivered the first serious blow to the Russian army. Despite heroic resistance, the brave Russian soldiers were forced to retreat. But after a swift regrouping, they were ready once more. Thanks to the enemy's poor coordination, Russian generals managed to win a series of decisive victories, defeating each allied army one by one. The fighting dragged on until late 1624, when Poland's allies, bled-white by losses, signed wide peace treaties with Russia, leaving Poland to face her fate alone. Soon after, the Commonwealth itself was utterly crushed. Cities such as Minsk, Vilna, Novogrudok, and others were liberated and reunited with Great Russia. In 1627, the Senate of the Republic authorized a new campaign to adjust the borders in Central Asia. The Great Horde ceded several of its provinces early on, and by 1631, the Empire of the Great Mongols followed suit, paying a hefty indemnity and entering a long decline. The Uzbek Khanate ceased to exist entirely, becoming part of Russia. Later, in 1658, another border adjustment followed with the Mughal Empire, while the Great Horde was finally annexed once and for all. In 1640, Russia's focus returned to the Far East. The Republic deemed it vital to secure the Okhotsk coastline and gain control of Sakhalin Island to improve maritime trade in the Pacific. Standing in the way was the kingdom of Shun. Unwilling to yield an inch, a new war flared up. Once again, Russian firepower and discipline proved overwhelming. By 1645, after losing its key northeastern provinces, Shun capitulated. Meanwhile, in the west, a brief campaign against Sweden and Lapland strengthened Russia's control over Finland and granted access to strategic islands in the Baltic Sea, the Åland Islands and Gotland. Possession of these islands gave Russia full strategic dominance over the entire Baltic basin. Soon after, Russian and Belarusian settlers began to populate them actively. Parallel to these European and Asian campaigns, Russia launched new colonial ventures. Based on the data from Pacific expeditions, explorers identified the ideal site for a new colony, the island of New Guinea. The tropical climate, so alien to the Russian soul, enticed settlers, while exotic crops promised to become lucrative exports on both Russian and European markets. From 1629, the western part of the island began to be actively settled. Unfortunately, full control proved impossible. English and French colonists soon claimed the eastern and southern coasts. Nevertheless, Russia opted for peaceful coexistence and raised no formal claims to the remainder of the island. Meanwhile, Russian America thrived. In 1629, it was granted broad autonomy, and all seemed well until 1655, when a neighboring Castilian colony launched a colonial war. Russia could not risk direct intervention for fear of triggering a larger European conflict with Castile and its mighty allies. Financial aid delayed the inevitable, as the odds were too uneven. By 1657, the Russian colony in America had fallen. Russia withdrew, but did not forget. Recovering from the humiliation, the Senate of the Republic made a firm decision to further expand Russian dominion along the Pacific coast, pushing even farther south. The Japanese continental possessions seemed ideally suited for this purpose. When offered a chance to cede them peacefully, the Emperor of Japan refused. And once again, the fires of war flared in the east. Russian forces swiftly occupied the desired territories, yet the Japanese refused to yield. Thus, in 1666, supported by the Pacific Fleet, Russian troops landed on the island of Hokkaido. All Japanese attempts to repel the invasion were crushed immediately. By 1669, the greater part of Japan was under Russian occupation. The emperor finally capitulated, and Russia achieved its aims. On the southern edge of the newly acquired territories, the city of Vladivostok was founded, a new stronghold that firmly established Russia's power in the Far East. In 1674, the Senate of Russia, led by Posadnik, resolved to complete what had begun 50 years earlier, the final reunification of the Lithuanian and Ruthenian peoples under the wing of Russia. A new war was declared. Once again, Bohemia joined the cause, having its own unsettled scores with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This time, Russia's weakened adversaries could offer little resistance. Within the first 3 years, the entire territory of the Commonwealth was occupied by Russian and Bohemian troops. Several more years were required to defeat Poland's remaining allies, but one by one they were broken and forced out of the war. Finally, in 1681, the King of the Commonwealth signed a peace treaty. Its eastern territories were ceded to Russia. There was no time for rest. In 1682, Russia once again marched to war against the Ottomans, this time with the aim of advancing into the lands of the Caucasus. The brave Russian soldiers left the enemy no chance. Battle after battle ended in victory. The foe suffered crushing losses. Yet, after 5 long years of war, Russia's reserves of men were all but depleted. Thus, in 1687, peace was signed. Several coastal provinces of the Black Sea, populated mainly by Georgians and Armenians, passed under Russian control. The Turks were also forced to pay a hefty indemnity. Cast out from the American continent, Russia now sought to restore its influence on the markets of the New World. The Republic's gaze turned toward the harsh, untamed shores of Greenland. In 1688, the Great Posadnik issued a decree to settle these lands and establish a way station for international trade companies. To protect against the hostile local tribes, a 5,000-strong garrison was dispatched. The long-standing alliance between Russia and the Sheikhdom of Ajam had borne fruit for both nations. Ajam, taking advantage of the decline of the Mughal Empire, expanded eastward, reorganizing itself into a new state, Persia, and became a regional power. But such balance could not last. Russia, as the protector of the Orthodox faith, could not stand idle while believers were oppressed in the Caucasus. In March 1690, war erupted once more. The armies of Persia and her allies were vast, yet the Russians held the advantage in discipline and skill. By 1694, a treaty was signed. The Eastern Caucasus, including the city of Baku and several provinces of Central Asia, were ceded to Russia. A just peace was restored. By the end of the 17th century, years of relentless warfare and the rising influence of the military class compelled the Republic to reorganize its political system. Henceforth, Russia became a military republic, where the military class held great sway in foreign policy and the head of the state was elected for life by free vote. Domestic policy, however, remained in the hands of the citizens and the Supreme Council. Over the last century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had grown weak and fragmented, a situation that greatly pleased its western neighbors, especially Brandenburg. But the Polish people were keen to the Russians, and Russia could not abandon them in the hour of need. In 1696, a new campaign was declared, the War of Russo-Polish Unification. After swiftly breaking the enemy's defenses, Russia annexed the southern and central territories of Poland, which were forever united with the motherland. The local population breathed a sigh of relief, finding peace and protection under the wing of Great Russia. All these brilliant triumphs, both on the battlefield and in the affairs of the state, led to a momentous event. In 1710, Russia solemnly proclaimed itself the Great Russian Federation. Now Russia boldly declared to the world its imperial ambitions, not as a tyranny, but as a realm of free people, bearing order and justice. A wave of modernization inspired by the West, fused with Russian ingenuity and diligence, propelled the nation to a new height of power and influence. In 1711, the governing Senate was established, the supreme legislative body of the Federation. Within its halls sat representatives from every corner of the vast nation: Moscow, Kiev, Novogrudok, Warsaw, Riga, Yekaterinburg, Vladivostok, and beyond. One after another, innovations in agriculture, industry, and trade transformed the land, while cities from Vilna and Kharkov to the distant Belotsarsk grew and flourished. Citizens of Russia enjoyed life across the boundless expanse of the great nation. Yet, in time, came the realization that not all in the world were as fortunate. Part of the Polish people still suffered under the yoke of the tyrannical government of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So, in 1717, the Senate authorized a special military operation to liberate the territories of Western Poland and Eastern Prussia. Russian soldiers, being met with flowers, swiftly took control of enemy lands, but the Western puppet masters refused to accept defeat, providing every form of military aid to the marionette regime. In 1719, the Commonwealth's chief patron, Milan, suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Lower Lusatia. The further course of the campaign was already decided. By 1722, the final agreement was signed. Eastern Prussia and Western Poland were formally incorporated into Russia. But even then, the mission to liberate oppressed peoples was far from complete. Brandenburg, holding the westernmost lands of the Polish nation, entered into an alliance with Russia's long-standing foe, the Ottoman Empire. In 1730, the rulers of Russia, Serbia, Bohemia, and Denmark resolved to bring an end to the tyranny. A new war ignited. Bloody battles raged along the coasts of the Baltic and Black Seas. In 1734, the entire European domain of the Ottoman Empire was under Allied control. The Russian navy dealt a crushing blow to the Ottoman fleet in the Aegean Sea. Amid these events, war-weary Brandenburg agreed to compromise with Russia. ceding several border provinces with a predominantly Polish population. Yet, there was no time to rest. While Russia was engaged on the European front, the Turks achieved considerable success in the Caucasus. Free from the Brandenburg campaign, Russian forces were swiftly redeployed south to aid their compatriots. Meanwhile, the Hellenic offensive pressed onward. The scattered Ottoman troops could offer no meaningful resistance against the united might of the Allied armies. At last, Turkey was forced to yield. Under the Treaty of 1738, Transcarpathia, northern Romania, Bessarabia, and the central provinces of the southern Caucasus were ceded to Russia, while Serbia finally gained access to the Mediterranean Sea. Thus began a new era of lasting peace. Parallel to the events unfolding in the West, the Republic carried out a series of campaigns in the East, aimed to expanding Russia's influence in Manchuria and the Kuril Islands. Standing in the way of this rising power was none other than Old Japan. Fortunately, the Russian Pacific Fleet managed to repeat its previous triumph, decisively crushing the Japanese forces and seizing Hokkaido and the Kuril Islands. Under the Treaty of 1754, the Kurils and a small portion of Manchuria came under Russian control. The territories of Manchuria, already densely populated, were not integrated directly. Instead, a federated government was established there, one founded upon republican principles akin to those of Russia itself. From 1755 to 1791, the territory of Allied Manchuria expanded significantly through close military and economic cooperation between the two nations. Thus, Russia's eastern frontier was finally and securely safeguarded. Nearly 40 years had passed in Western Russia since the last wars against the Germans and the Turks. The state of affairs generally satisfied Russia and its allies, yet in 1775 punitive raids by the Ottoman army against the fraternal Armenian people in the Caucasus, alongside the systematic oppression of Orthodox Greeks, Serbs and Bulgarians, left the nations of the Russian alliance with no choice but to once again take up arms against the oppressors. Once more, Brandenburg stood on the side of the Turks. The professional, battle-hardened Russian army, equipped with the most advanced weaponry, left neither Turks nor Germans a single chance. A series of decisive battles over the following 4 years settled the score. By 1780, a new peace treaty was concluded. In Europe, Russia gained several Polish provinces, including Gdańsk. In the Caucasus, the Republic acquired provinces with predominantly Armenian populations, Kars and Yerevan. Serbia, too, received control over several regions inhabited by South Slavs. Another significant provision of the peace was the liberation of key Greek provinces, where free Greece was reborn, under the natural guardianship of Russia, of course. Yet the greatest achievement of the war was the official transfer of Constantinople from Ottoman to Russian control. From that moment, the city was renamed to Tsargrad. For 3 centuries, the cradle of Orthodoxy had been oppressed under Islamic rule, but that era had come to an end. By 1788, thanks to substantial Russian state and private investments, the legendary Hagia Sophia had been fully restored to its former glory, standing once again as global icon of orthodoxy. But the nation lived by more than war alone. Life inside Russia flourished. Decades of investment had made the country a world economic leader, while the capital's Novgorod trade hub became the richest commercial center on the planet. This prosperity drew even greater capital to the country, accelerating the construction of manufactories from Warsaw and Gdańsk to Vladivostok and Kamchatka. The loss of Constantinople was a catastrophic blow to the Ottoman Empire, plunging it into chaos and decline. Neighboring states, many former Ottoman allies, took advantage of the situation, carving out their own pieces of the Turkish pie. In particular, Aragon seized numerous strategically important Greek islands still under Ottoman control. The supreme leader of Greece appealed to the Russian Senate for assistance in peacefully returning these territories to the rightful owners. Yet, Aragon's representatives refused any concessions. By 1791, Russia and Greece had no choice but to declare war. The combined forces of Greeks, Serbs, and Russians swiftly drove Aragonese troops from Greek and Balkan lands. Every attempt of counter-landing ended in utter defeat. By the end of the year, Aragon, backed by France, attempted to invade Russian lands, laying siege to the proud city of Krakow. While the Russian garrison held firm, the Baltic, Ural, and Siberian armies, totaling 250,000 bayonets, arrived to reinforce the defenders. On the 12th of December, the battle ended in a crushing defeat for the Spanish and French forces. Yet, by the following April, the French made another attempt to break the Russian defensive line north of Krakow, but once again, the brave Russian soldiers upheld the honor of the uniform, delivering a decisive repulse. Finally, in February 1796, the liberation of Greek territory from Aragonese control was formally confirmed in writing. 140 years had passed since the fall of the Russian colony in America, yet the memory of that national humiliation burned brighter than ever. The persecution of Russian settlers, the forced conversion to Catholicism, and the flood of Mexican migrants left the Republic with no other choice. In 1797, the Senate supported the Grand Posadnik's proposal to prepare a large-scale amphibious assault against the territories of the Castilian colony in Russian America. An expeditionary force of 120,000 troops was assembled for the landing. Realizing the numerical advantage and potential threat posed by the Castilian metropolis, the Russian Republic constructed a vast defensive network of fortresses along its borders in Europe and Central Asia. The first wave of the landing force set sail for the western shores of Alaska in the summer of 1797. The Catalonian administration, utterly unprepared for such a daring strike, could offer no serious resistance to the Russian troops. Meanwhile, a separate Castilian army of 50,000 men attempted to assault the fortress of Tashkent, advancing through Persia, but suffered a devastating defeat and was swiftly annihilated by arriving Russian reinforcements. By the beginning of 1799, the main invasion force had seized a vast portion of Alaska and pushed southward along the Pacific coast of America. Throughout that year, the Russian Pacific Fleet destroyed the Castilian colonial squadron, which had guarded the western seaboard. With the seas cleared, Russian supply lines remained secure, and by year's end, the Castilians finally attempted a pitched battle, only to be driven deep into the continent. However, in April 1800, Castile received reinforcements from other colonies and from its ally, Portugal, bringing the combined strength to 500,000 troops. Outnumbered, the Russians withdrew northward to the defensible coastal mountain ranges. Strong positions and fresh reinforcements stabilized the front, but further advance was impossible. Recognizing Russia's overwhelming naval dominance, the High Command resolved upon a bold new move, a landing in southern California. The swift destruction of another Castilian fleet and the rapid occupation of the region placed the colonial administration in dire straits. By March 1803, an agreement was reached. Russia would withdraw its forces from southern California in exchange for full control over the northwestern coast. After a century and a half, justice had at last prevailed. New waves of Russian settlers streamed into the reclaimed territories, and in 1805, an autonomous colonial administration was established there. The name Russian America was officially restored. The outcome of this final war cemented Russia's status as the great power of the East. The complete abolition of serfdom, the transition to a free society, and universal access to education made Russia a beacon of liberty, a nation that achieved progress not through revolution but through evolution. Meanwhile, in the West, the Ottoman Empire was rapidly collapsing. Russia could not stand idly by, bound by duty to protect the Orthodox peoples of Bulgaria and Wallachia. In 1809, Russian and Greek forces broke through to one another, establishing a land corridor and seizing the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits. Greek forces also liberated several historically Greek islands, including Cyprus and Rhodos. Following the peace treaty with Turkey, and in recognition of Greek valor and eternal friendship between the two nations, the Senate decreed that Tsargrad be transferred under direct Greek administration. The principalities of Bulgaria and Wallachia likewise gained independence, free to determine their own destiny. The harsh climate of North America forced the Russian colony to import food either from faraway Vladivostok and Okhotsk at great transportation cost, or from Castilian colonies. However, in 1811, Castile and Portugal, along with their colonies, declared an embargo on Russian America. These measures placed the colony in grave peril, and its administration appealed to the Senate of Russia for aid. In June 1812, Russia entered a new war, its aim to break the blockade and secure the fertile lands to the south and southeast of its American territories. During the first year, Russian troops advanced almost unopposed, seizing vast tracts of the Central Plains. Yet by 1813, major engagements with Castilian armies began. At first, Russia prevailed, but within months, massive reinforcements from Castile forced the Russians to withdraw towards the original borders. In the summer of 1815, north of the Rocky Mountains, one of the decisive battles of the campaign unfolded. A 600,000-strong Castilian force, reinforced by its allies, clashed with a detached Russian army of just 80,000 men. Reinforcements arrived too late and fell into a deadly trap. Russia suffered a devastating defeat in America and was forced to retreat to the coast. Fortunately, timely reinforcements stabilized the front along strong defensive lines. Realizing that much of the Castilian alliance's army was tied up in America, Russian High Command launched a bold counterstroke, an invasion of Milan. Supported by the Black Sea and Baltic fleets, Russian forces conducted simultaneous amphibious landings in southern Milan, while other units advanced from the north through Bohemia. Russian forces achieved remarkable success in Milan. By 1817, recognizing the need to advance deeper into Castile itself, Russia requested passage rights through France, a nation it had only recently fought against. Yet the French, long-time enemies of Castile, agreed. "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," as the saying goes. In August 1817, Russia engaged a 120,000-strong Castilian Milanese army, surrounding and annihilating it in a catastrophic defeat for the defenders. Milan, brought to its knees, capitulated unconditionally, granting Russia the use of its ports and bases for the forthcoming Castilian campaign. A 500,000-strong Russian army surged through France into Castile. By 1818, brutal fighting raged across the country's northern provinces. Castilian and Portuguese garrisons were wiped out one after another. By year's end, Portugal, facing total invasion and ruin, withdrew from the war and lifted its embargo on Russia and her colonies. Throughout 1819, Castile's remaining forces were crushed or captured, while its navy suffered annihilation off the coast of Gibraltar. By early 1820, nearly all Castile's homeland lay under Russian occupation. The defeated kingdom sued for peace. Under the treaty's terms, Castile lifted the embargo on Russia and ceded the islands of Ceram and Dambon in Southeast Asia. along with vast territories to the northwest and west of the Rocky Mountains in America, granting Russian America access to rich and fertile lands. Amid the triumph, the city of Novoarkhangelsk was founded, soon becoming one of the colony's most important trading ports. By 1821, Russia stood as the undisputed economic and military leader of the world. Its capital, St. Petersburg, one of the richest cities on earth, shone as the jewel on the Republic's glory. Thus did Russia enter the 19th century powerful, steadfast, and utterly confident in its destiny.